Well, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is calling on the Liberals to scrap the temporary foreign worker program, arguing it has flooded the market with cheap labor.
It is a very exploitative system that has allowed corporate elites to profit off of driving wages down and driving jobs out, and we're going to put an end to it.
Conservatives say they want to keep a separate program for agricultural workers, but all other temporary foreign workers should be permanently abolished. Some business groups and the Prime Minister have been quick to push back.
That program has a role. It has to be focused in terms of its role. We've been absolutely clear as a government that we want, and we're putting in place policies so that the overall level of immigration as a proportion of the population will decline.
Michelle Rempel Garner is the Conservative critic for immigration, refugee and citizenship, and she joins me now. Michelle Rempel Garner, welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
You called today for the elimination of the temporary foreign workers program. Why eliminate it and not reform it?
Because reforms haven't worked in the past, and the consequences to Canadian youth, it's too high. You know, we just came out of a summer where we heard story after story of kids putting in resumes and not getting a single callback, hundreds of resumes. And, you know, this is on top of data that shows that first jobs are disappearing because of changes in technology. It's harder for people to buy homes and get that first job experience. And frankly, I think it just boils down to Canadians should have the first crack at Canadian jobs. And this program has distorted that. It suppresses wages, and it's time for it to go.
Some of the examples that you pointed to, Canadians are welcome to apply for those. It says it right there on the job posting. The salaries that some of you pointed to were like $35 an hour, $36 an hour. That's a $75,000 a year job. I mean, why wouldn't Canadians apply for those? And because this is what the CFIB and others say, is that they're just not getting people to apply for these.
I don't buy that. I think that's bunk. The fact is, even your network has reported extensively on the abuse in that program. There's a lot of workers, temporary foreign workers, who have been abused by these programs. It essentially amounts to indentured labor. We've heard about unscrupulous employers who are essentially taking kickbacks, right, from some of these employees. So, you know, I don't buy the argument that Canadians aren't taking these jobs, especially when we see stories of kids putting in hundreds of resumes and not getting those calls back.
But, you know, where's the clear data point linking these kids applying for jobs and it going to a temporary foreign workers? Because if you listen, Tim Hortons, for example, who you singled out today, they issued a statement saying only 5% of the workforce.
5% too much, though.
Okay, but in certain parts of the country, like, you know, I remember being in Labrador and seeing temporary foreign workers working in the fast food service there because the wages that the local kids can make in other areas, they're not going to go work in fast food. So there's a problem with a consistent labor pool. There is a gap in the labor market, is there not?
Well, there's a lot of Canadian youth who are trying to get their voices heard because they're not getting those job placements, and they don't have the luxury of expensive lobby groups to come on your show and speak for them. And that's what we're doing today. We're saying that for all those youth, you know, there's story after story and newspaper after newspaper this summer about kids not getting jobs, that it's time for this program to go away. And, you know, essentially what this program does is it does place a cap on wages from the government, right? And
there's a prevailing wage condition, though, right?
Well, but we also have seen wage suppression, even in Statistics Canada reports, right? Like, I think it was Q1 of this year, some of the lowest income Canadians have seen their wages actually freeze or reduce. So I don't buy this stuff. You know, we just went through a federal election campaign, and story after story that I heard in my community in Calgary showed that there are people out of work. And, you know, so there's the evidence that people see with their eyes, and then there's the spin that we hear from, you know, high-powered lobby groups. And it's about time that Canadian workers have somebody standing up for them and calling a spade on this.
Okay, well, I don't know if you're including this Canadian Federation of Independent Business as a high-powered lobby group, but their president, Dan Kelly, says you didn't consult with them on this, and they do a lot of the employing in this sector, and that he says scrapping the program is ridiculous. He says there's thousands and thousands of places in Canada where there's no entry-level workers available, especially rural areas.
Well, I think that keeping the program is ridiculous. How
do you fill those rural labor gaps?
Well, we said today a lot of the jobs that he might be talking about are related to agriculture.
No,
right?
it's more. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. Here's the thing, that we need to have boldness in politics, right? And so perennially, like even when I've been around for a hot minute, right? And I hear these groups say, well, Canadians don't want to fill these jobs. They don't want to move to these communities. But there's this crutch standing in the way, right? There's this program that allows this essentially endless supply of temporary foreign labor. And instead of focusing on labor mobility strategies, on skills training, on ensuring that companies are paying market wages, we've had this program as the stopgap. And we are in an unprecedented youth jobs crisis right now. Like, it is crazy. A bunch of 1 in 5 students are going back to school this fall having not found a job this summer. So, I think now is the time for boldness. This program has been rife with abuse, not just for wage suppressing for Canadians, but also for the workers who have come to Canada on it. We're not blaming them. The Liberals have enabled this, and it's time for the program to go.
Yeah, look, the agriculture jobs, obviously a lot of those will be in rural areas, but that's a separate sort of stream in some cases. But a lot of the jobs Dan Kelly was talking about was maybe a dishwasher in a pizza restaurant, or someone who changes does the housekeeping in a hotel in a small rural town. I don't know if young people are in Toronto or in the major cities who can't get a job are going to move to take those jobs, right? And if they do, it would maybe be for a summer until they go back to school. How do you fill those jobs?
I just look at this differently. I think that the temporary foreign worker program has normalized a permanent but temporary foreign indentured labor underclass in Canada, right? Why aren't we talking about labor mobility strategies, right? It's always, the fallback is always, well, we need more temporary foreign workers. We are at a juncture in Canadian history with the economy, teetering on in recessionary territory, where we have a youth jobs crisis, that we have to say that employers need to be looking for Canadians to fill these jobs. I do not buy it. The unemployment numbers across this country, particularly in youth, show that there are Canadians who are willing to work and can't find jobs. I think if this program didn't exist, that would be the first step to addressing some of those problems.
Okay, so you say you want to keep a temporary foreign worker program of some sort for the agriculture sector, right?
Well,
because there are issues there with harvesting season and different things where you just need people at scale at a wage that you're not going to get with the domestic workforce, it seems.
And I think if you talk to a lot of agricultural producers, people that are in the agri-food industry, they'll actually complain about the fact, they'll say that this program, their needs should never have been lumped into the same category as a Tim Hortons in South Calgary.
Sure.
That's looking at. And by the way, to push back on your point with Tim Hortons, they're applying for temporary foreign workers in Calgary, where the youth unemployment is high. So, and if they want, are they endorsing this position then? I digress. There needs to be a separate stream for legitimately hard to fill agri-food positions. But that can't be conflated, again, with a Tim Hortons in South Calgary, who could easily hire a Calgary youth to do some of these jobs.
Look, my first job was at McDonald's, right? And I do see temporary foreign workers at the McDonald's when I go home to visit my family, but I still know the people, had a career in management there, they just can't get kids to apply for the job.
I don't buy it.
Well, but this is people who I worked with, in the kitchen back in the day. And when you talk about it as wage suppression, some of the examples you gave, like the $37 an hour at a Booster Juice, I think it was, that's a good salary, though.
It is. It's a great salary, and if these companies are willing to pay that to a temporary foreign worker, think about what that could mean for somebody who's starting out in life, right, and gaining life experience. My chief of staff, his first job was at McDonald's. We were talking about this as we were prepping for this announcement, how some of the life skills that we learned in our entry-level jobs got us to that point. So this program needs to go. I think it's changed our country in a really bad way from the perspective of the abuse that it places on people who are coming to Canada to help build our economy, but also for young Canadians who aren't getting those opportunities anymore.
But I guess this is a final point. In northern Canada, rural and remote Canada, there is a need, but there isn't necessarily the supply of people there. So if you do away with this program, I know you talk about labor mobility within Canada, but these are not journeymen with specific skills that need accreditation to work in different provinces. This is often unskilled labor. How do you even approach a labor mobility challenge?
Well, this morning when we announced the change, we acknowledged that there will likely need to be a transition period in areas of legitimate low employment, right? At or below the rate of natural unemployment is kind of what's in my head. Sure, but I just reject the premise that we need to fill Canadian jobs with temporary foreign labor, that we can't, as a country, rise to the occasion where we have this jobs crisis. We have so many skilled, talented youth who are desperate to build these jobs. And that's why this program needs to go. I think it's bigger than the program itself, David. It's a change in thinking and ethos and betting on the future of our kids. So you know, this is a big one for me, and it's a big one for our party.
Okay. Conservative immigration critic Michelle Rempel Garner, good to have you back on the show. Good to talk to you. Thanks for being here. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says he wants the federal government to get rid of the temporary foreign workers program.
The Liberals have to answer. Why is it that they're shutting our own youth out of jobs and replacing them with low-wage temporary foreign workers from poor countries who are ultimately being exploited?
The Conservatives say they would axe the current program, but they would create a separate program for difficult-to-fill agricultural jobs. The Prime Minister responded to Poilievre, saying the government is working to bring down immigration as a proportion of the population. But Carney also said for many Canadian businesses, access to the temporary foreign worker program is a priority.
That program has a role. It has to be focused in terms of its role. When I talk to businesses around the country, particularly in Quebec, but elsewhere across the country, their number one issue is tariffs, and their number two issue is access to temporary foreign workers.
Okay, let's bring back the power panel to talk about all of this. We've got Amanda Alvaro, Brad Levine, Tim Powers, and Sherelle Evelyn. Brad, what do you make of this? Is this a legitimate policy critique? Is this an attempt to reach young Canadian voters? What do you make of this position from the Conservatives and what it might mean for the business community if it goes away?
Yeah, well, I always suspect when Pierre Poilievre talks about caring about young people and employment and workers, because I don't buy it. Temporary foreign workers program is fundamentally flawed. In fact, a UN review of the program called it a breeding ground for contemporary forms of slavery. It is deeply flawed, and it's too bad that Pierre Poilievre was never in government in his 25 plus years in politics, because he could have done something to do it. Because if it's driving down wages and cutting out young people from work today, then it certainly was when he was in the Stephen Harper government back in the 2000s. So it's great that he's come to the dance, but he's a little late, and the last song has already been played. There needs to be drastic reform in this program. Now, you've heard the response from the small business community, and you heard certain sectors after his announcement talk about how they desperately need it because no Canadian or permanent resident in Canada wants to take those jobs. I think that there is a path for a program that doesn't exploit, that doesn't indenture those individuals. The New Democrats put forward in the last Parliament policy changes that would help that. And that, it's a closed permit, which means that you come over to Canada and you can only work for that one employer. That one employer is exclusively in charge of your destiny. That is wrong. And that should be altered. But to scrap the program in all sectors, excluding agriculture, I think would be a step in the wrong direction, particularly for those in rural and remote parts of this country.
So Tim, this is what I wonder about. I remember going to Labrador, to cover a news event there, and temporary foreign workers at the A&W, for example, and in northern Canada, in rural and remote Canada, the fish plants increasingly back home. There are no young people who want to do those entry-level jobs. So it's temporary. So what do you make of this debate?
There's definitely policy renewal that can happen. I actually agree with Brad, so we may as well stop the program right now on that.
Well, you've always been a closet New Democrat, so it's about time it came out.
I'm a Jack Harrison Democrat. Hi, Jack. Love you,
How's your French?
But maybe I'll run for leader. What I was going to say is there's a political opportunity here, but it's a really risky political opportunity. Look, I'm an employer. We hire a lot of young people. We have a lot of young people who are born here, and we have no temporary foreign workers. They're putting their hands up. They're getting opportunities. So I'm sure there are places where it may be tougher to work and get a job, but I don't think you can lay all the blame at the temporary foreign work program. I think Pierre Poilievre has to be careful with this. I think Jason Kenney was on the House not that long ago and talked about, we had to have the Conservatives in particular had to have a bit more of a broader, mature approach to how we dealt with and spoke about immigration issues. I think maybe worth the Poilievre office listening to what Kenney had said about these things before, because Jason Kenney spent a lot of time trying to encourage immigration and make immigration work. I appreciate the temporary foreign worker program is something different. I appreciate there are loopholes in it. But I would say to you, David, to your point about the fishery, there are lots of fish plants in our province that also employ Newfoundlanders and Labradorians that would have trouble operating were it not for the temporary foreign workers who come and work there and contribute enormously to our province.
Yeah, and those Jason Kenney comments were on an episode of The House a couple of weeks ago. Kate McKenna.
Yes, it was a documentary.
It was basically an hour on where should the Conservatives go from here. It's a good listen if you have the time. So Amanda, on this though, obviously any program, potential for abuse, right? That is going to exist no matter what you do. But some of the salary examples being trotted out today, like $37 an hour to work at a booster juice, that's like a $75,000 salary if you do 40-hour week, 52 weeks a year. That's not indentured wages. That's not low wages. And if you're in a place and there are challenges in the local market, what do you do if this program goes away?
Well, that's exactly the problem with Poilievre's comments. Throw the baby out with the bathwater all the time. They just always speak in absolutes, and there's such a mischaracterization. I agree with what Brad said. I agree with what Tim said. I think that there are challenges with the program. I think the Prime Minister said the same thing. There are fixes to be had, but you're villainizing all businesses. All businesses must be looking for cheap labor. Small businesses must be looking for cheap labor. That's not the truth. And Dan Kelly from CFIB, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, came out today with a smackdown to Poilievre and said, listen, there's a few things at play here. In many cases, these jobs are in rural and remote parts of Canada. There isn't a bunch of Canadian youth who are lined up waiting for those jobs in rural Saskatchewan to wash dishes. It's just not happening. In fact, many of these temporary workers are protecting Canadian jobs for the reasons that Tim just mentioned, because those employers would have to shut down if they didn't have employees who would work the kinds of jobs the Canadian youth, frankly, are not lining up for. So when you conflate the issues, when you say things like we're boxing out Canadian youth from getting jobs, you inflame an issue that doesn't need to be inflamed, instead of constructively looking at a policy and saying, what could we tweak or manage here to make it more productive for the country? You're playing politics with good policy, and that's a problem.
I wonder, Cheryl, does this become the axe to tax, approach of this parliament, because it is something they've zeroed in on and are obviously making a central issue. I mean, what do you make of what we saw today?
Well, I think, as with many things in politics, there's probably a lot of things that can be true at the same time. We don't have the data per se on, specifically which communities, you hear anecdotally about young people who, go to the McDonald's and apply and can't get the jobs, and they're desperate to work and they can't get in because these jobs are filled with temporary foreign workers. And then you also hear about the rampant abuses. So there is a mixture of things that can be true, but I think politically it's kind of interesting to see who is lining up in terms of support for the program and who wants it reformed, who wants it scrapped. I took a quick glance at the lobbyist registry just to see who was kind of looking, who's been talking to people in government, and you have names like Entertainment Software Association of Canada, Mushroom Growers, the CFIB, Manufacturers and Exporters, Food and Beverage Canada, Canadian Trucking Alliance, Hotel Association, Tourism Industry Association. These are some of the types of groups that would be really hard politically to have them all against you. So that, to me, is really interesting. Obviously, Pierre Poilievre, he's made no secret of the fact that he likes poking at corporations and CEOs and kind of stoking a bit of that animosity. But for everybody else who wants those votes, obviously the people who work for these companies and organizations are and fall under these umbrella groups. They have their own votes. They have the Canadian electorate. They can vote however they want. But the fact that these specific companies and organizations are going to the government saying, hey, no, we actually want these programs and we want more access to them and we want to reduce the regulatory burden, that doesn't mean that they should stay as they are. But it is does add that little extra political wrinkle when you want to say, okay, we're just going to anger all of them.
Right. Well, it's interesting. Like Brad, today, Tim Hortons got put in the bullseye in Canadian politics, which is a rare thing, even though it is no longer a Canadian wholly owned company. But it's the 1,300 round numbers of temporary foreign workers they've hired, and the numbers we've gotten from the government, like that's accurate, but that's over like a half decade. So that is like a couple of hundred a year. Some of it is renewals potentially. And, Tim Hortons said it's like 5% of their workforce. Restaurants Canada says it's 3% of their workforce. It's construction, trucking, agricultural sector where the vast swath of it is. The attack on the fast food service industry is an interesting thing. And there's like a promise to name and shame people there today.
Yeah. Well, the challenge with the different sectors, as you mentioned them, is it's the one that the public engages with. We don't drive by farms or go into the fish packing plants to see the makeup of the workforce there, but we do go through the drive-through or go into the restaurants themselves and get served by these. So that's the public's understanding of the program is what they see on their day-to-day, and that's the problem. But cracking down on the abuse, I mean, the Immigration Committee in the last Parliament, nibbled around the edges. There has to be some wholesale reform. The protections about workers, if we want to talk about the protection of workers, you can't just talk about the hourly rate. That's one component. Yes, yep. Those wages to a lot of people would say, well, those are reasonable. But, the notion of housing, the notion of prompt payment, the notion of hours where all of these things have been identified as huge issues with the program. And if Parliament comes back and the Immigration Committee has more time to do it, this would be a wonderful time to do that. You've got precarious work right now, particularly among young people. The youth unemployment rates are horrendous. It's one of the understated policy matters facing this country. We don't talk about youth unemployment as much. And if this triggers a discussion about what our young people are doing and how they're making their way in their first jobs, then I think that would be a positive outcome from this conversation.
Yeah, I just do want to say, because we have talked about Tim Hortons and we've talked about abuse for the Tim Hortons legal department, we are in no way saying that is you.
No.
I just want to make that very clear, because this gets. But there have been examples of it, right, with people sure. Crammed into houses.
But I give you look. We have a food service business that requires people to go to work at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning to bake things. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you from being a bit removed from it, but from the people who operate on a daily basis, young people aren't lining up for that job because of its hours and because of its skill set. So we look for people who've newly come to Canada who can perform those skills. So again, I think if you're saying the whole program doesn't work and it's disadvantageous to Canadian youth, that there's danger in that because it doesn't speak to the realities of many of us business owners.
Right. Well, look, I'm sure we'll get to the bottom of it in question period. All right, we're going to say goodbye to the Power Panel. Amanda Alvaro, Brad Levine, Tim Powers, and Sherelle Evelyn.